The floor rushed up to meet me before I even knew I was falling. One moment I was sitting in the leather chair at Harrison and Associates, listening to the lawyer begin reading my father's will. The next, my legs turned to water, my vision collapsed into a narrow tunnel, and the world tilted sideways. I heard my mother gasp. I heard the lawyer's voice cut off mid-sentence. But the sound that would haunt me forever was the whisper that came from my sister Emily, so close to my ear that I felt her breath on my skin. Stop acting. 2 words, delivered while I was dying on a conference room floor. I tried to speak, to scream, to beg for help, but my body had betrayed me completely. My mouth wouldn't form words. My hands wouldn't move. All I could do was lie there, staring up at the ceiling lights that blurred into smears of white, while my heart hammered so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was Emily's face hovering above mine. She wasn't scared. She wasn't worried. She looked satisfied. And in that moment, I understood something that would change everything. My sister hadn't just betrayed me. She had tried to kill me. But to understand how I ended up dying on a lawyer's floor while my little sister watched with satisfaction, I need to take you back 5 days earlier. Back to the phone call that shattered the fragile peace I'd built for myself. Back to the moment I made the mistake of going home. I was in my apartment in Boston when my phone rang. It was a Tuesday evening, and I'd just gotten back from work. I remember because I was standing in my kitchen, looking at my medication schedule on the refrigerator, mentally checking off my evening insulin dose. I'd been managing my type 1 diabetes for 15 years by then. Diagnosed at 19, terrified at first, but eventually I learned that my condition was just part of my life, not a limitation. Just something I managed, like brushing my teeth or paying my rent. The caller ID showed my mother's name, Eleanor Parker. I almost didn't answer. My mother and I had what therapists politely call a complicated relationship, but something made me pick up. Maybe instinct, maybe fate. Her voice was flat when she delivered the news. Your father passed away this morning. Heart attack. It was quick. The funeral is Saturday. The will reading is Monday. Emily is handling everything. No greeting. No asking how I was doing. Just facts, delivered like a grocery list. And that detail at the end, the one that told me everything about my place in this family. Emily is handling everything. Of course she was. Emily always handled everything because Emily was the daughter who mattered. I should explain something about my family. My sister Emily is 4 years younger than me. Growing up, she was what my mother proudly called the golden child. Pretty, charming, good at making people love her. I was the other one, the sensitive one, the dramatic one, the daughter who made everything difficult. When I was diagnosed with diabetes, Emily told her friends I was faking it for attention. She said it loudly enough for me to hear, and when I confronted her, my mother told me to stop being so sensitive. That was the pattern of my childhood. Emily could do no wrong. I could do nothing right. Eventually, I learned the only way to survive my family was to leave it. I built my own life in Boston, a career in health insurance, a small apartment that was entirely mine, a routine that kept me healthy and sane. I hadn't been home in 2 years, but now my father was dead, and despite everything, I owed him a goodbye. I was packing my suitcase when I found it, an envelope tucked into my desk drawer, still sealed. A letter from my father, dated 2 weeks earlier. I'd been meaning to open it, but work had been busy, and I kept putting it off. Now he was gone, and I'd never know what he wanted to tell me while he was alive. I put the letter in my bag. I would read it later, when I was ready. Then my phone buzzed, a text message from an unknown number. But when I read it, my blood went cold. The message was scheduled, sent automatically from my father's phone after his death. The words on my screen were the last thing he would ever say to me. Natalie, Come home. There is something I need you to know. Something about Emily. Trust no one until you read my will. Dad. I stared at those words for a long time. What did he know? What was he trying to warn me about? I should have listened. I should have been more careful. But I didn't know then what I know now. My father had been trying to protect me from beyond the grave, and Emily had already started planning how to make sure I never survived long enough to find out why. The Parker family home looked exactly the same as I remembered. A large colonial with white shutters, perfectly manicured lawn, the kind of house that looked warm and welcoming from the outside. I sat in my rental car in the driveway for a full 5 minutes before I found the courage to get out. Emily's silver Mercedes was already parked near the garage. My mother's Lexus sat in its usual spot. Everyone was here. Everyone except the man we were burying in 2 days. The autumn air was sharp when I finally stepped out. Leaves crunched under my feet as I walked up the path I'd walked 1,000 times as a child. The porch steps still creaked in the same places. But when I reached the front door, I realized something that made my chest tight. I didn't have a key anymore. I had to ring the doorbell of my childhood home like a stranger. My mother opened the door wearing black, her silver hair perfectly styled, her expression perfectly composed. She looked at me the way you might look at an unexpected delivery. "You're late," she said. "Emily has been here since yesterday, helping with arrangements. No hug. No, I'm glad you're here. Just criticism, served cold." I stepped inside, and the smell hit me first. Funeral flowers, dozens of them, filling the living room with their heavy sweetness. Photos of my father were displayed on every surface. Robert Parker at his law firm's anniversary dinner. Robert Parker accepting an award from the Connecticut Bar Association. Robert Parker with Emily at her college graduation. I didn't see any photos of him with me. Maybe I shouldn't have been surprised. I was still looking at the photos when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and there was Emily, rushing toward me with her arms open wide. "Sissy," she cried, pulling me into a hug. "I'm so glad you're here." The nickname stopped me cold. Sissy. She hadn't called me that since we were children. I stood stiff in her embrace, my arms barely lifting to return the gesture. When she pulled back, she was smiling. "But I've known Emily my whole life. I know what her real smile looks like." This wasn't it. "Let me take your bag," she said, already reaching for my suitcase. "You must be exhausted from the flight. Do you want tea? Something to eat?" I made sandwiches. She was being helpful, attentive, kind. Everything she had never been to me in 34 years of sisterhood. My skin prickled with unease, but I told myself I was being paranoid. People change when someone dies. Maybe grief had softened her. Then she asked the question that made my blood freeze. "Oh, you still take all that medication, right? For your condition?" She said condition like it was a rumor she'd heard, not a disease I'd lived with for 15 years. Before I could answer, she continued. "What time do you usually take your pills? I'll set a reminder on my phone so I can help you." I stared at her. Since when did Emily care about my medication schedule? Since when did she care about me at all? Dinner that night was a performance. Emily sat at the head of the table, filling the space our father had left empty. She talked about the funeral arrangements, the flowers, the catering, all the ways she had stepped up to handle everything during this difficult time. My mother nodded along, occasionally adding details, but mostly just watching Emily with something close to pride. I barely spoke. I was too busy watching, too busy listening. When Emily mentioned the will reading scheduled for Monday, she smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure Daddy left everything fair and square," she said. "He always knew who really took care of him." The message was clear. She had been here. I had not. I was the absent daughter, the selfish one who abandoned her family for a life in Boston. I wanted to defend myself, but what was the point? They had already decided who I was years ago. The sensitive one, the dramatic one, the one who probably faked her diabetes diagnosis for attention. I excused myself early, claiming exhaustion from travel. But as I walked down the hallway toward my old bedroom, I heard something that made me stop. Emily's voice, low and urgent, coming from our father's study. She was on the phone with someone. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath. I could only catch fragments, but what I heard was enough. "Trust me," Emily was saying. "Everything will be handled before the will reading. She won't be a problem." My heart pounded so hard, I was certain she could hear it. Who was she talking to? And what did she mean, I won't be a problem? I barely slept that night. My childhood bedroom felt like a museum exhibit, preserved exactly as I'd left it, but no longer mine. I unpacked my medication carefully, arranging everything on the nightstand the way I always did. Insulin pens, oral medication, glucose monitor, emergency tablets, my nightly ritual, my lifeline. Around 10 o'clock, there was a soft knock at my door. Emily entered without waiting for me to answer. She was carrying a small gift bag with pink tissue paper. "I got you something," she said. "I know I haven't always been supportive about your health stuff. I want to do better." She pulled out a bottle of expensive-looking vitamins. "They're supposed to help with energy and blood sugar support," she explained. "You should take them with your other pills. They work better together." I took the bottle, examining it. The pills inside were oval and white, similar in size and shape to my diabetes medication. I thanked her, but something felt wrong. Since when did Emily research anything related to my health? I set the vitamins on my nightstand next to my real medication and told myself I was overthinking everything. I finally started to drift off sometime after midnight. Then, I heard them. Footsteps in the hallway. Soft, careful, deliberate. They stopped right outside my door. The doorknob turned slowly, testing whether it was locked. I held my breath, heart slamming against my ribs, phone clutched in my hand. The knob stopped turning. The footsteps retreated. I didn't sleep again that night, and in the morning, when I looked at my medication bag, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. It had been moved, just slightly, just enough. Someone had been in my room while I pretended to sleep. Someone had touched my medication, and I was too afraid to ask who. I woke the next morning feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My eyes were gritty, my body heavy with exhaustion, but my mind was already racing. The first thing I did was check my medication bag. Everything looked exactly the same. Insulin pens lined up neatly, oral medication bottle in its usual spot, glucose monitor, test strips, emergency tablets. Nothing appeared disturbed, but that feeling from last night wouldn't leave me. Someone had been in my room. Someone had touched my things. I examined my pills closely, pouring a few into my palm. Same oval shape, same white color, same size. They looked identical to what I'd been taking for years. I shook my head at my own paranoia. Emily was difficult, manipulative, maybe even cruel, but she wasn't dangerous. She was my sister. I tested my blood sugar, slightly elevated, but nothing alarming. Probably stress from the funeral today. I swallowed my morning pills with a glass of water and told myself to get through the next 2 days. The funeral today. The will reading tomorrow. Then I could go home to Boston and put this family behind me again. The service was held at St. Michael's Church in Westport. The pews were filled with my father's colleagues, friends, distant relatives I barely recognized. I sat in the front row between my mother and Emily, wearing the black dress I'd packed, feeling like an imposter at my own father's funeral. Emily delivered the eulogy. She stood at the podium looking beautiful and composed, tears glistening at exactly the right moments. "Daddy always said family was everything," she said, her voice breaking perfectly. I was blessed to be by his side until the very end. I felt the words like a knife between my ribs. The implication was clear to everyone in that church. Emily had been here. Emily had been faithful. And where was Natalie? Too busy with her life in Boston to bother coming home. After the service, relatives approached with condolences. An aunt I barely knew squeezed my hand and said, "We didn't expect to see you here, dear. Emily mentioned you were too busy with your career." I smiled and said nothing. What could I say? Emily had been controlling the narrative for years, painting me as the selfish daughter who abandoned her family, and I had made it easy for her by actually leaving. At the reception, Emily stayed close to me, bringing me water, offering food, asking repeatedly if I'd taken my medication. "You look pale," she said, studying my face. "Did you take those vitamins I gave you this morning?" I lied and told her I had. The vitamins were still sitting untouched on my nightstand. Something about them felt wrong, and I'd learned long ago to trust my instincts even when I couldn't explain them. Later that afternoon, I escaped to the kitchen to refill my water glass. I needed a moment away from the sympathetic looks, the whispered judgments, the suffocating performance of grief. But Emily followed me. She cornered me by the refrigerator, her voice low so no one else could hear. "I've been reading about type 1 diabetes," she said. "It's interesting." The way she said interesting made my skin crawl. "What's interesting about it?" I asked carefully. She shrugged. "Just that some people don't really need all that medication. Some doctors say it's overprescribed. Have you ever tried just not taking it? To see what happens?" I stared at her, struggling to keep my voice calm. "My pancreas doesn't produce insulin, Emily. Without medication, I'd die. It's not optional." She waved her hand dismissively. "You always were dramatic. I'm just saying, maybe you've been told you need it more than you actually do." Before I could respond, my mother appeared in the doorway. "What's going on here?" she asked, her eyes moving between us. Emily's face transformed instantly into innocent concern. "Nothing, Mom. I was just asking Natalie about her health, trying to be supportive." My mother turned to me. "Don't be difficult, Natalie. Your sister is trying. The least you can do is appreciate it." I said nothing. There was no point. There never had been. Later, I went to use the bathroom and noticed the small trash can was overflowing. On top of the pile was something that stopped my heart, an empty vitamin bottle. The same brand Emily had given me. But this bottle was completely used up, the label partially peeled away as if someone had been comparing it to something else. Beneath it was a small plastic bag with white residue inside, like powder from crushed pills. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone and took photos. Evidence. I didn't know exactly what for yet, but something was very wrong. That night, I locked my bedroom door before getting ready for bed. I'd never done that in this house before. I took my evening medication, examining each pill carefully before swallowing. My diabetes pills usually had a slight bitter taste when they touched my tongue. Tonight, the pill tasted like nothing, chalky, neutral, like a vitamin. My stomach dropped. I poured the remaining pills into my hand and studied them. They looked identical to my real medication. Same markings, same color, same shape. But the weight felt slightly different. The texture was smoother. Had someone switched my pills? Or was I losing my mind? I couldn't know for certain without a lab test. And I couldn't get a lab test at 10 o'clock the night before the will reading. Just past midnight, the footsteps came again. They stopped outside my door. The doorknob rattled, someone testing whether it was locked. Then Emily's voice, a whisper through the wood. "Sissy, are you awake? I just wanted to check on you." I didn't answer. I didn't move. I barely breathed. After a long moment, the footsteps retreated. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:30. It was Marcus Harrison, my father's lawyer, confirming the will reading at 10 o'clock. But before he hung up, he said something that made me pay attention. "Miss Parker, I want you to know that your father left specific instructions. There's a clause in the will that is unusual. I'm not permitted to discuss it beforehand, but I want you to be prepared." "Prepared for what?" I asked. A long pause. Then, carefully, he said, "For the possibility that today may be difficult. For everyone. Just pay attention to everything." Your father was a very thorough man. He hung up, leaving me staring at my phone. My father was thorough. He'd sent me a warning text. He'd told me to trust no one until I read his will, and now his lawyer was telling me to pay attention. I looked at my medication bottle sitting on the nightstand. Those pills that might not be my pills at all. I made a decision. I wouldn't take my medication this morning. I needed to stay alert, stay sharp. If something was wrong with those pills, I needed to be fully present for whatever was about to happen. What I didn't know then was that skipping my dose wouldn't protect me, because the pills I'd taken last night weren't real either. My body was already in danger, and by the time I realized it, I would be dying on a lawyer's floor, listening to my sister tell me to stop acting. The morning of the will reading, I came downstairs to find Emily making breakfast. She stood at the stove wearing an apron, scrambling eggs, looking like a picture of domestic warmth. The sight was so wrong it made my skin crawl. In 30 years, I had never once seen Emily cook anything. My mother sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and newspaper, barely glancing up when I entered. "Good morning, sissy," Emily called out, her voice bright and cheerful. "I made eggs. You need to eat something before the reading." She set a plate in front of me. I sat down, my body heavy with exhaustion from another sleepless night. My hands were trembling slightly. I told myself it was just nerves, just stress, just the weight of everything that had happened. I pulled out my pill organizer, preparing to take my morning medication. Then I remembered my decision from earlier. I wasn't going to take the pills. I needed to stay alert. But Emily was watching. Her eyes tracked every movement I made. If I didn't take the pills, she would notice. She would ask questions. She would know I suspected something. I made a split-second decision. I would take them. I would act normal. I would get through this day, get through the will reading, and then I would figure out what was really happening. I swallowed the pills with a gulp of orange juice. Emily's lips curved into a small smile. Satisfied. The drive to Hartford took 20 minutes. My mother drove, Emily in the passenger seat, me alone in the back. 15 minutes into the trip, I started feeling strange. A slight tremor in my hands that wouldn't stop. A thin film of cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. I checked my continuous glucose monitor discreetly. My blood sugar was dropping, faster than it should have been, faster than made any sense given that I'd just eaten breakfast. I reached into my purse for my emergency glucose tablets. I always carried them. 15 years of managing this disease had taught me to be prepared for anything. I chewed 2 tablets quickly, letting the sweet powder dissolve on my tongue. Relief should come within 10 minutes. I counted the seconds, waiting for my body to stabilize, but my hands kept shaking. My vision stayed slightly blurry at the edges. The tablets weren't working. "You okay back there?" Emily turned around from the front seat, studying my face. "You look pale." "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." Emily smiled. "Maybe it's nerves. Big day, right? Finding out what Daddy left us." There was something in her voice. Anticipation. Excitement. Like she was waiting for a show to begin. Harrison and Associates was housed in a stately brick building in downtown Hartford. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs, the heavy atmosphere of old money and legal formality. I gripped the doorframe as we entered the conference room, hit by a wave of dizziness that nearly sent me to my knees. I sat down immediately, grateful for the solid chair beneath me. The lawyer entered moments later. Marcus Harrison was in his early 60s, with silver hair and sharp, assessing eyes. He shook each of our hands in turn. When he reached me, he held my hand a moment longer than necessary. "Miss Parker," he said quietly, "your father spoke of you often. The words surprised me. My father had talked about me. To his lawyer." Marcus's eyes flickered across my face, taking in my pallor, my trembling hands. Something passed through his expression. Concern? Warning? I couldn't tell. Emily's voice cut through the moment. "Mr. Harrison, thank you for accommodating us." She had taken a seat at the head of the table, a power position. "Shall we begin? I'm sure we're all anxious to hear Daddy's final wishes." She checked her watch. Twice. As Marcus opened his briefcase to retrieve the documents, I caught a glimpse of something beneath the main folder. A sealed manila envelope marked in bold letters. Emergency protocol. Open only if triggered. Marcus saw me looking and quickly covered it with other papers, but his expression flickered. Guilt? Warning? I filed the image away. My father had left something else, something beyond the standard will. Marcus began reading. Standard provisions first, bequests to charity, instructions regarding the house, financial arrangements for my mother. The words blurred together as I struggled to focus. My blood sugar was crashing. I could feel it now, the confusion clouding my thoughts, the weakness spreading through my limbs, the desperate, screaming need for something my body wasn't getting. Emily interrupted. "Mr. Harrison, what about the division of assets between my sister and me?" Marcus paused. "I'm getting to that, Miss Parker. Your father had specific conditions." The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the table, trying to steady myself. My glucose monitor vibrated against my hip. Critical low. The numbers flashing red. I tried to reach for my purse, for more glucose tablets, for anything. But my hands wouldn't cooperate. My arms felt like they belonged to someone else. I opened my mouth. "I need." Emily moved faster than I'd ever seen her move. She grabbed my purse, rummaging through it. "Here, let me help you, sissy." "What do you need?" She pulled out my medication bottle, the one with the fake pills. She held it up for everyone to see. "She just needs her pills. She's always so dramatic about her condition." She opened the bottle, shook out 2 pills, and offered them to me with a look of exaggerated concern. "Here you go, sissy. Take your medicine." I stared at the pills in her palm. My dying brain finally connected the dots. Those weren't my pills. They had never been my pills. Emily had switched them. She had been poisoning me through absence, removing the medication I needed to survive. I tried to speak, to accuse, to scream for help. What came out was barely a whisper. "You switched." Emily leaned close. Her face filled my fading vision. Her perfume overwhelmed me, and her whisper was meant only for me. "Shh. Stop acting. You're embarrassing yourself." Then my body gave out completely. I slid from the chair and hit the floor. The world went gray, then darker. The last thing I heard was Emily's voice, suddenly loud and panicked for the benefit of everyone else in the room. "Oh my God! Someone help!" My sister fainted. But I had heard the truth in that whisper. I had seen the satisfaction in her eyes. The last image before unconsciousness claimed me was Marcus Harrison's face above mine. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't confused. He looked like a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment. His phone was already in his hand. 911 already dialed. As if he had been prepared. As if my father had warned him something like this might happen. I was dying on my father's lawyer's floor. My sister had tried to kill me, and somehow, impossibly, I had the feeling that my father had known this would happen all along. The floor was cold against my cheek. I could feel every fiber of the carpet pressing into my skin, could smell the chemical cleaner beneath the surface, could hear everything happening around me, even though my body refused to respond. My eyes were open but unfocused. The ceiling lights had become blinding white smears. My heart hammered against my ribs in an irregular rhythm that terrified me. This is what dying feels like, I thought. Slow, helpless, completely aware. I tried to move my fingers. Nothing. Tried to turn my head. Nothing. Tried to call for help. My mouth opened, but no sound emerged. I was trapped inside my own failing body, a prisoner watching my own potential death unfold. Chairs scraped across the floor. My mother's heels clicked rapidly on the hardwood. Marcus's voice was sharp, urgent, already taking control. But the sound that cut through everything else was Emily approaching. I felt her kneel beside me. Her hand stroked my hair in what must have looked like a gesture of comfort, but her whisper was only for me. I told you, you always make everything about yourself. Emily stood and turned to face Marcus and my mother. I couldn't see her expression from where I lay, but I could hear the tears in her voice. Perfectly calibrated, perfectly timed. "This happens sometimes," she said. "She has these episodes. She just needs to rest." I could hear her pulling out her phone. "I'll call our family doctor. He knows how to handle her." My mother's voice, desperate and embarrassed. "Yes, call Dr. Mitchell. He'll know what to do." She turned to Marcus. "I'm so sorry for the disruption. My daughter has always been sensitive. I heard those words from the floor where I was dying. Sensitive. Even now, even with me collapsed and unresponsive, my mother's first instinct was to apologize for the inconvenience I was causing, to minimize, to explain me away." Marcus's voice cut through. "Mrs. Parker, with respect, your daughter is not having an episode." I heard him move, heard the sound of his phone unlocking. "I need an ambulance at Harrison and Associates, 47 Main Street, Hartford. Female patient, 34 years old, type 1 diabetic, suspected severe hypoglycemia or diabetic ketoacidosis. She's unresponsive. Send someone immediately." Emily's voice changed. Sharper, panicked. But not the right kind of panic. Not the panic of someone worried about their sister. The panic of someone whose plan was falling apart. "You don't need to do that. She's fine. She does this for attention." Then came the sound that changed everything. A soft thump, something hitting the floor. Emily must have gestured too quickly, knocked something off the table. I heard objects scattering across the hardwood, lipstick rolling, keys jangling, and then silence. A specific, charged silence. I couldn't see what had happened, but I felt the shift in the room, the temperature dropping, Marcus's voice, cold and controlled. "What is this?" He must have bent down to pick something up. I heard the soft click of plastic. "This insulin pen is prescribed to Natalie Parker. It's still sealed. Full." "Why is it in your bag, Miss Parker?" Emily's response came too fast, too high-pitched. "That's mine. I was holding it for her. She asked me to carry it. She's always forgetting things." Marcus again. "If you were holding her insulin, why is it still sealed? Why didn't you give it to her when she started showing symptoms? Why did you offer her pills instead of the injection she actually needed?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to rise up from this floor and point at my sister and tell everyone what she had done. But all I could do was lie there, listening to the silence stretch, listening to Emily's lies finally meeting the wall of evidence. My mother's voice shook. "Emily? What's going on? Why do you have Natalie's insulin? She needs that insulin." Emily's composure cracked. I could hear it in her voice. Mom, I told you, she was faking. She doesn't really need all that medication. She's been lying to us for years. My mother's response surprised me. Faking? Look at her, Emily. Look at her. For once, for the first time in my memory, my mother wasn't automatically defending Emily. Something had finally broken through. Sirens in the distance, growing closer. Emily heard them too. Her window was closing. You don't need to involve paramedics, she said to Marcus. This is a family matter. Marcus's response was ice. Miss Parker, your sister is dying. This stopped being a family matter the moment she hit the floor. The paramedics arrived in a blur of voices and movement. I felt hands on me, professional and quick. Felt the blood pressure cuff tighten on my arm. Felt a finger prick for glucose testing. Blood sugar is critically low, someone said. She needs glucose and insulin stat. An IV needle slid into my arm. Cold fluid began flowing through my veins, and slowly, the gray edges of my vision began to recede. Is she on any medication? A paramedic asked the room. Does she have her insulin with her? Marcus answered before anyone else could. She's a type 1 diabetic. This is her insulin. He must have held up the pen from Emily's purse. It was in her sister's possession. Unused. The paramedic's voice changed. Type 1 and no insulin administered? For how long? I believe, Marcus said carefully. That's a question for Miss Emily Parker. I couldn't see Emily's face, but I could imagine it. The dawning realization that she wasn't going to talk her way out of this one. My mother's voice, barely a whisper. Emily, Natalie never said she didn't need insulin. She needs it to live. Everyone knows that. Emily's response was desperate. No, Mom, you don't understand. She's been lying to all of us. She doesn't really have diabetes. The paramedic cut her off. Ma'am, this woman nearly died from diabetic crisis. That's not something you can fake. They loaded me onto a stretcher. The ceiling tiles of the conference room scrolled past above me. My vision was clearing now, the glucose doing its work. I turned my head and saw Emily standing apart from everyone, arms wrapped around herself, face pale. I saw my mother, actually crying, reaching for my hand as the stretcher passed, and I saw Marcus, still holding my insulin pen like evidence, because that's exactly what it was. I forced words through my dry throat. She switched my pills. Marcus leaned close. I know, he said quietly. Your father warned me this might happen. Rest now. We're not finished here. The stretcher reached the doorway. I passed Emily. Our eyes met, and for the first time in my life, I saw real fear on my sister's face. Not fear for me, fear for herself, fear of what was coming. Just before the door closed behind me, I heard Marcus's voice, cold and final. Miss Emily Parker, Mrs. Eleanor Parker, you will both remain here. The will reading is suspended but not concluded. Robert Parker left specific instructions for a situation exactly like this one. There is a sealed document I am now authorized to open. I suggest you sit down. Emily's voice, panicked. What document? Daddy didn't leave any special document. Marcus's reply was the last thing I heard before the door closed, and the paramedics wheeled me toward the waiting ambulance. Your father knew, Miss Parker. He knew everything. And he made sure that if anything happened to Natalie, the truth would come out. All of it. My father was dead. My sister had tried to kill me. But somehow, from beyond the grave, my father was still protecting me. And Emily was about to learn that some secrets don't stay buried, even when you bury the person who knew them. I surfaced slowly, like swimming up from deep water. The first thing I felt was the scratch of hospital sheets against my skin, then the pinch of an IV needle in my arm, then the steady beep of a heart monitor somewhere nearby. My mouth was dry. My body felt hollowed out and fragile, like I might shatter if I moved too quickly. I opened my eyes to a white ceiling and fluorescent lights, dimmed to a soft glow. For a moment I didn't know where I was or how I'd gotten there. Then everything came rushing back. The will reading, the floor rising up to meet me, Emily's whisper in my ear. Stop acting! I was alive! Somehow, impossibly, I was still alive. A nurse appeared at my bedside, her face warm with professional kindness. Welcome back, Miss Parker. You gave everyone quite a scare. I tried to speak, but my voice came out as a croak. What happened? You went into severe diabetic crisis, she said. Your blood sugar crashed to dangerous levels. If they'd gotten you here 30 minutes later, well... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. An hour later, a doctor entered my room. She introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Chen, an endocrinologist. She was direct and competent, the kind of doctor who didn't waste words. She pulled a chair beside my bed and looked at me with eyes that missed nothing. Miss Parker, I need to ask you something important. When did you last take your insulin? I took my medication yesterday and this morning, I said. From my prescription bottle. Dr. Chen frowned, consulting my chart. That's what concerns me. Your blood work shows no trace of insulin in your system. None at all. It's as if you haven't taken any in at least 48 hours. That's impossible, I said. I took my pills. I watched myself take them. Dr. Chen chose her next words carefully. Miss Parker, your oral diabetes medication should have shown up in your blood work too. It didn't. Whatever you were taking, it wasn't your prescription. The words landed like a physical blow. I had suspected. I had feared. But hearing it confirmed by a medical professional made it real in a way I couldn't deny. Someone switched my medication, I said. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. The lawyer who accompanied you in the ambulance mentioned that possibility. He also turned over an insulin pen that was found in your sister's possession. Unused. I stared at her. It was in Emily's purse. Yes, I've already documented everything. This is a medical record now. Official. Whatever happened to you, Miss Parker, it's no longer your word against anyone else's. Before she left, Dr. Chen paused at the door. There's something else you should know. A man is waiting to see you. Your father's lawyer. He says it's urgent. She hesitated. Whatever is happening with your family, it seems your father anticipated it. He left instructions with this hospital as well. You're the only one authorized to receive information about your treatment. Not your mother, not your sister. Only you. I stared at the empty doorway after she left. My father had protected my medical privacy. Even before he died, he had been preparing for this. Marcus Harrison entered my room carrying a leather briefcase. He looked older than he had that morning, the weight of what he knew visible in the lines of his face. He closed the door carefully and pulled a chair close to my bed. Miss Parker, Natalie, I'm glad you're awake. There's much we need to discuss, and I'm afraid it can't wait. Where's my mother? I asked. Emily? At the police station. I called the authorities after you left in the ambulance. Emily is being questioned about the insulin pen in her possession and your medication discrepancy. The words hit me in waves. Police, questioned, authorities. She actually did it, I said. She actually tried to kill me. Marcus's voice was gentle. I don't believe she understood the full consequences of her actions. She thought she was exposing a lie, not committing attempted murder. But intent doesn't erase harm. She thought I was faking. I could hear the grief in my own voice. After 15 years, she still thought I was faking. The loneliness of that hit me harder than the physical trauma. 15 years of managing a chronic illness. 15 years of injections and blood tests and careful management. and my own sister believed it was all performance. Tears rolled down my face. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet grief for the sister I thought I had, for the family I never really had. Marcus waited. He didn't rush me. He understood that some pain needs space. When I had steadied myself, Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out a manila envelope. The one I had glimpsed earlier, marked Emergency Protocol. "Your father gave me this 3 months ago," he said. "He told me to open it only if, his exact words, something happens to Natalie that shouldn't." "He knew," I whispered. "He knew Emily would do something. He suspected. He'd been watching Emily's behavior for some time, and he was concerned about what might happen after he was gone." Marcus broke the wax seal on the envelope. Inside was a USB drive, several documents, and a handwritten letter. He handed me the letter. "This is addressed to you. He wanted you to read it first." My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. My father's handwriting. Familiar. Comforting. Now, heartbreaking. I read aloud, my voice breaking on every line. "My dearest Natalie, if you're reading this, something has happened. Something I prayed would never come to pass but feared might. I want you to know I always believed you, about your illness, about your struggles, about everything Emily dismissed as drama. I believed you, and I'm sorry I didn't protect you better while I was alive." The letter continued. He explained what he had discovered. Emily skimming money from his accounts, forging his signature, lying about investments. He wrote about his regrets, his hopes, his love. The final lines shattered me. "I can't undo what I allowed to happen, but I can make sure it never happens again. Everything you need to protect yourself is in this file. Use it, and know that I loved you. I always loved you, even when I was too weak to show it." Dad. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. My father had believed me. All those years of feeling invisible, feeling dismissed, feeling like the problem child, and he had believed me all along. Marcus gave me a moment before speaking. "There's more." He opened his laptop and inserted the USB drive. Multiple files appeared, video folders dated over the past year, financial documents, scanned receipts. He clicked the most recent video file. The image that appeared was grainy, green-tinted. Night vision from a security camera. The Parker family home. The hallway outside my childhood bedroom. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m. A figure moved down the hallway. Careful, deliberate. The figure paused at my bedroom door, looked around to make sure no one was watching, and then slipped inside. Even in the grainy footage, even in the green glow of night vision, the figure was unmistakable. Emily. Marcus fast-forwarded. The video showed Emily emerging 11 minutes later with something small in her hand, a prescription bottle. She moved to the bathroom, stayed inside for several minutes, then returned briefly to my room before retreating to her own bedroom. Marcus paused the recording. "There's more," he said. "Financial records showing Emily withdrew over $200,000 from your father's accounts while he was hospitalized. Forged signatures. And there's a morality clause in the will. Any beneficiary who causes harm to another family member forfeits their entire inheritance." I stared at the frozen image on the screen. My sister, caught on camera, stealing my medication. My father, building a trap from beyond the grave. "Your father knew," Marcus said quietly. "He built this case piece by piece, and Emily just walked into it." I looked at the laptop, at the evidence my father had gathered, at the letter that told me I had always been loved. My father had spent his final months preparing for war, a war he knew he wouldn't live to fight, but he had armed me with everything I needed to win it, and for the first time since I'd come home, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like his daughter. Marcus played the full security footage without fast-forwarding this time. I watched my sister creep down the hallway at 2:47 in the morning, her movements careful and deliberate. She entered my bedroom and moved directly to the nightstand where I kept my medication. Under the glow of her phone's flashlight, she examined my prescription bottle, turning it over in her hands. Then she pocketed my real medication and replaced it with something from her robe. The entire switch took less than 30 seconds. Practiced, precise, premeditated. Watching the footage felt surreal, like watching a crime documentary about someone else's life. But that was my bedroom, my medication, my sister. She planned this, I said. This wasn't impulsive. Marcus shook his head. The footage shows her doing the same thing the previous 2 nights as well. Testing, preparing, making sure you wouldn't notice the difference. He switched to another camera angle. The bathroom. Emily crushing pills, comparing sizes, sorting vitamins to match my medication exactly. The care she took, the attention to detail, all to harm her own sister. She really thought she'd get away with it, I whispered. She thought she was proving you were a liar, Marcus replied. Instead, she proved she was a criminal. Marcus opened another file on the USB drive, a video of my father himself, recorded 3 months before his death. When his face appeared on screen, my breath caught in my throat. He was thinner than I remembered, clearly ill, but his eyes were sharp and focused. He was sitting in his study, the same room where I used to do homework as a child. "If you're watching this," he began, "something has happened to Natalie. And if I know my younger daughter, and I do, Emily is responsible." He spoke for several minutes. He explained how he had discovered Emily's true nature over the past few years, how he had watched her manipulate our mother, manipulate family finances, manipulate the truth about my health. "I should have stopped it sooner," he said, his voice breaking. I kept hoping she would change, that the daughter I raised was still in there somewhere. But some people don't change. They just get better at hiding. Then he looked directly at the camera, directly at me. "Natalie, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I let them call you dramatic.
I'm sorry I didn't speak up when Emily mocked your illness. I'm sorry I chose peace over truth." Tears streamed down my face. "I can't undo what I allowed to happen," he continued, "but I can make sure it never happens again. Everything you need to protect yourself is in this file. Trust Marcus. He's a good man, and know that I loved you. I always loved you, even when I was too weak to show it." He paused, looking off camera as if gathering courage for what came next. "There's one more thing, Natalie. Something I never told anyone until I sealed this envelope." His voice dropped. "Emily isn't just stealing money. 6 months ago, I found evidence that she tried to change the terms of my medical care. She contacted my doctors, pretending to be my healthcare proxy, asking about accelerating comfort measures. She wanted me to die faster, Natalie. Your sister wanted to speed up my death so she could get her inheritance sooner." I stopped breathing. Emily hadn't just tried to kill me. She had tried to kill our father, too. Marcus walked me through the financial evidence. Over 3 years, Emily had withdrawn $247,000 from our father's accounts. She had forged his signature on 12 separate transfer documents. She had created a shell company called EP Consulting that did no actual consulting. She had paid the minimum on our father's bills to avoid suspicion, told our mother the accounts were being restructured for tax purposes. She had even hired an accountant, paid with stolen money, to create fake reports. The healthcare fraud was worse. Marcus showed me emails Emily had sent to our father's medical team, posing as his healthcare proxy, even though she had never been legally designated. The requests were chilling: increase sedation, limit interventions, discuss quality of life versus quantity,
One doctor had flagged the requests as suspicious. That's how my father found out. He changed his will the following week. Marcus pulled out the physical will document and read the morality clause aloud. Any beneficiary who is found to have caused deliberate physical, emotional, or financial harm to another beneficiary shall forfeit their entire inheritance. Said inheritance shall be redistributed according to the alternate provisions detailed in Appendix C. So Emily gets nothing, I said. Less than nothing. The clause also stipulates that evidence of harm be turned over to appropriate authorities. Criminal prosecution isn't optional. It's mandated by the will itself. Originally, the estate was to be split. 50% to Emily, 35% to me, 15% to our mother. Total value approximately $2.4 million. Emily's share would have been $1.2 million. Now she would receive zero. Her share transferred entirely to me. I felt no triumph, only exhaustion and grief. I don't want her money, I said. I just wanted her to be my sister. Marcus's voice was gentle. I know, but this was never about money for Emily either. It was about control, about being the favorite, about making sure you had nothing, not even your health. I realized he was right. The money was just a symbol. Emily had wanted to erase me completely. A knock at the door interrupted us. 2 detectives entered, a woman and a man who introduced themselves as Detective Okonkwo and Detective Miller. They had been working with the district attorney's office since Marcus's call. Miss Parker, Detective Okonkwo said, we've reviewed the evidence. We have enough to charge your sister with attempted assault, theft by deception, forgery, and fraud. The DA is also considering attempted murder charges given the severity of your medical crisis. Where is Emily now? I asked. She was released on bail 2 hours ago, Detective Miller said. Your mother posted it. Of course my mother had posted bail. Even now, even with video evidence, she had chosen Emily. I felt the old wound reopen, then deliberately closed it again. I couldn't control my mother's choices. I could only control my own. What do you need from me? I asked. Your statement, your medical records, your willingness to testify if this goes to trial. I didn't hesitate. You have all of it. Detective Miller's phone buzzed. He stepped aside to answer, and when he returned, his expression had changed. Miss Parker, there's been a development. Your sister Emily is here. In this hospital. She's demanding to see you. My heart pounded. What? She arrived 10 minutes ago, making a scene in the lobby. She's claiming this is all a misunderstanding, that she needs to explain, that you're twisting everything. Marcus stood. She's violating the temporary protective order. She shouldn't be anywhere near this building. We're aware, Detective Miller said. Security is holding her downstairs, but she's saying she won't leave until she talks to her sister. She says she has proof that you set her up. I stared at the door, knowing Emily was somewhere below me in this building, still scheming, still lying, still refusing to accept what she had done. My sister had tried to kill me. She had stolen from our dying father. She had spent years convincing everyone I was the problem, and even now, caught on camera, facing criminal charges, she was still trying to flip the script. But I wasn't the scared, silent girl she remembered. I was my father's daughter, and I was done being the villain in her story. Let her come up. The words left my mouth before I could second-guess them. The detectives exchanged glances. Marcus started to protest. Natalie, you don't have to do this. I know, I said. But I want to. I want her to look me in the eye and tell me I'm faking while I'm lying in a hospital bed because she almost killed me. Detective Okonkwo nodded and spoke into her radio. A few minutes later, the door opened, and Emily appeared. She looked nothing like herself. Her hair was unwashed, her mascara smudged, her clothes wrinkled. The polished golden child had crumbled. She rushed toward my bed with her arms outstretched. Sissy! she cried. "Thank God you're okay! This has all been such a terrible misunderstanding." I held up my hand. "Stop, right there." Something in my voice made her freeze. Authority she had never heard from me before. Power she didn't know I possessed. Emily tried her usual tactics. Tears welled in her eyes. Her voice trembled with wounded innocence. "Natalie, you have to believe me. I was only trying to help. I read online that some diabetics don't actually need all that medication." I cut her off. "Emily, we have video footage of you switching my pills at 2:47 in the morning. We have footage of you crushing vitamins in the bathroom to match my medication. We have 3 nights of evidence." Her face flickered. A crack in the mask. That's... Dad was spying on us? That's an invasion of privacy." I almost laughed. "You're worried about privacy? You tried to kill me." She pivoted immediately, the classic move of someone who cannot accept blame. "This is exactly what you always do. You twist everything to make yourself the victim. I was trying to prove you've been lying to this family for years." I kept my voice calm. "I'm lying in a hospital bed, Emily. The doctors confirmed I had no insulin in my system. You stole my medication. That's not a misunderstanding. That's attempted murder. I didn't know it would." She stammered. "I didn't think." "You didn't think." I agreed. "You never thought about anyone but yourself." Then I delivered the truth she couldn't escape. "We also know about the money, Emily. The $247,000, the forged signatures, the shell company." Her face went white. "And we know about the emails to Dad's doctors, asking them to increase his sedation, to limit interventions. You tried to speed up his death. That's not..." Her voice cracked. "I was trying to help him. He was suffering." "He wasn't suffering," I said. "He was watching you, and he saw everything." Emily's legs gave out. She sank into a chair, all pretense gone. For the first time in my life, I saw my sister clearly, not the golden child, not the master manipulator, just a hollow person who wanted everything and valued nothing. "What's going to happen to me?" she whispered. "That's not up to me anymore," I said. "It's up to the courts, and the morality clause in Dad's will." Her head snapped up. What morality clause? And I realized she had never known. She had walked into our father's trap completely blind, because she never imagined anyone could outthink her. Detective Okonkwo stepped forward and took Emily's arm. "Miss Parker, you're in violation of the temporary protective order. You need to come with us." Emily looked at me one last time, searching for something. Forgiveness. Weakness. A way back in. "Natalie," she said, "we're sisters. We're blood. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I let the question hang for a moment before answering. "It meant everything to me, Emily. For 34 years, it meant everything. I defended you. I made excuses for you. I convinced myself that somewhere inside you was the sister I wanted you to be." My voice stayed steady. "But you tried to kill me. You tried to kill our father. Blood doesn't give you the right to destroy the people who share it." She opened her mouth, but there was nothing left to say. The detectives led her out. The door closed. Silence filled the room. I exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding for years. 3 months later, I stood in the spring sunshine outside my apartment in Boston. My life had rebuilt itself in ways I never expected. I was back at work, back in my routine, but everything felt different. I was different. My medication was secured now. I checked it myself every time, trusting no one else. I had started therapy to process not just the attack, but 34 years of family dysfunction. I slept better than I had in years. Emily's trial was pending. The charges included attempted assault, grand larceny, forgery, and fraud. Marcus estimated 3 to 7 years of prison time. My mother hadn't called once. She had chosen her side, and it wasn't mine. I had made peace with that. Some mothers don't know how to love all their children equally. It wasn't my job to fix her. The inheritance had come through. With Emily disqualified by the morality clause, I received $1.6 million. I hadn't wanted the money. It felt like blood money. But then I realized my father had left it to me for a reason. He wanted me to build something good. So I established the Robert Parker Foundation for Chronic Illness Advocacy. The mission was simple: helping patients with invisible illnesses fight for proper care and recognition, funding support groups, providing medical bill assistance, running educational campaigns about conditions like type 1 diabetes. My father's name would live on, not through wealth hoarded, but through help given. On a quiet spring morning, I drove to Westport Cemetery. I walked across the dew-covered grass until I reached my father's headstone. Simple granite, dignified. I knelt and placed white roses against the stone, tracing the letters of his name with my fingers. "Hi, Dad," I said softly. "I wanted you to know I'm okay. Better than okay. I'm alive because you protected me, even when you couldn't be here." I paused, letting the morning breeze carry my words. "I wish you'd told me while you were alive. I wish we'd had more time. But I understand now why you did what you did. You loved me the best way you knew how." Tears fell, but they weren't bitter anymore. They were grateful. "Thank you for believing me. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for being my father." I stood and looked at the headstone one last time. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Whole. Not because my family was fixed. It wasn't. It never would be. But because I finally knew I was never the problem. I was just the one brave enough to survive it. My sister called me a liar for 15 years. She nearly killed me trying to prove it. But in the end, the truth came out. Not because I shouted it, but because my father made sure it couldn't stay buried. Some people don't get this kind of closure. Some people spend their whole lives being gaslit, dismissed, told they're too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. If that's you, if you're listening to this, and you've ever been made to feel like your pain isn't real, I want you to know something. Your pain is real. Your truth matters. And you don't need anyone's permission to protect yourself, even from the people who are supposed to love you. I shared my story because I needed to, because for years I stayed silent, and silence almost killed me. But I also shared it because I know I'm not alone. There are millions of us. Daughters, sisters, wives, mothers. Women who've been told we're too much when we were just asking for the bare minimum. Respect, belief, safety. If my story helped you feel less alone today, I'd love to hear yours. Drop a comment below. Tell me what you survived. Tell me what you're still fighting, because this channel isn't just about my story. It's about all of ours. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. There are more stories coming. Stories of women who refused to be silenced, who found their voices, who discovered that the people who doubted them were wrong. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And thank you for believing me. My name is Natalie Parker. I survived my family. And if you're still fighting yours, keep going. Your truth will come out too.